Welcome back to iGen Politics. This is a podcast that makes politics engaging and relevant for all generations. This is Victor Shi.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, and I'm wearing a Liberty Bell today because I think that it represents the democracy that we have had, that I hope we can continue to have as we face a lot of big events in the news.
Yeah.
And today, Victor, can we talk about at least two of those things? One would be the vice president, former vice president, Pence, also has classified documents in his
Right.
home. And so I want to talk about both the the process that allowed him to
Yeah.
get them to his house and why he, this many years later, has them, and talk about that. And then also there was a hearing in Atlanta this morning. Fulton County
Fulton County.
DA Fani Willis made a presentation about whether the special grand jury's report should be public. Let's talk about those two things. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with the Mike Pence thing because I was in class and I got this notification. So my class was on Zoom and I got this notification from CNN saying that Mike Pence is basically the FBI raided his not raided but searched his
Yeah.
home in Carmel, Indiana, and found about a dozen classified documents. And this was last week, and we are just hearing about it now. And I had to read it twice because I'm like, how is it possible
I
that
know.
Mike Pence now is involved in this too? And so I'm wondering, I think there are some key differences, and you can definitely explain this better than I can, but what's the difference between what Trump did, and it seems like what Pence is doing more related to what Biden's doing, which is that it's lawful. Sure, it's not great, but it's lawful compared to Trump. Is that a
Well,
right way to read it, what we have so far?
yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a lot we don't know, I want to say, about Pence and what caused him to have this search done. And um, there are, in terms of the differences between how he's handling it and how President Biden has handled it, is both of them are cooperating. Neither of them required um, a search warrant or a subpoena.
Mhm.
And there has never been a prosecution for retention of classified documents without there being something more than the retention. But this raises the issue of how are they getting out of the government's hands? Where are these being viewed to begin with? Why are they in people's offices? Why are they, um, going forward? But maybe we can continue this conversation after we introduce our guest for the
Yes.
day. He is the reason that I am wearing this Liberty Bell pin. And so, why don't we, Victor? Why don't you start with some introduction to this episode?
Absolutely. So, a few weeks ago, we saw thousands of Brazilians storm the country's capital because their candidate, Bolsonaro, lost and claimed the election was stolen and one conceded to the winner, Del Silva. And if that image rings a bell in your mind, it should, because it's eerily similar to what happened right here in America slightly more than 2 years ago on January 6th, 2021, when thousands of Trump supporters stormed our Capitol building because they were fed a big lie and were egged on by Donald Trump. And so today we're going to talk about, was Bolsonaro and his right-wing voters inspired by Donald Trump's big lie and his followers' insurrection at our Capitol? Election denial and disinformation are also hallmarks of fascism. And today we're going to talk about that and the spread of fascism around the world and right here at home, and what we can all do to push back against it and its causes. And we're joined by a great guest. Jill, do you want to introduce him?
Yes, I would. I am very excited to be meeting for the first time a fascism expert, Jason Stanley. Um, he is a professor of philosophy at Yale University. He's been there since 2013, and before that, he was at Rutgers University. He is also the author of numerous books, including one that is especially relevant for our conversation today. It's called How Propaganda Works, and that fascinates me. It won the Prose Award for Philosophy from the Association of American Publishers. He writes about authoritarianism, propaganda, free speech, and other topics for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Review, the Guardian, and other publications. So, Jason, thank you very much for joining us live today.
Thank you so much. And I hear me. I'm sorry. I'm on my cell phone because my for some reason my internet is not working.
Oh, dear. I'm sorry about that. But yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
So, no problem. And we can see you as well. So, that is good.
All good. So we want to get right into the conversation. So you study fascism, and many Americans, I don't think, realize what that quite means, and they reject the idea that that is or could happen here. So first, define what fascism means, and tell us if you think that fascism is growing in America right now.
So fascism is a cult of the who promises national restoration, humiliation by.
Wait, well, hold on a second. You are breaking up.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me shift to.
That sounds better.
Uh,
but now we lost your picture, but at least we can hear you.
Let's see. Stay there.
The technical problems of doing a live show. You are witnessing it here. And do we have a chat feature that people can send in questions?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, and we saw, and I can see you.
Good. So fascism is a cult of the leader who promises national restoration in the face of supposed national humiliation by minorities, by LGBT, by immigrants, by feminists. He says that the nation is being destroyed. The real people of the nation, in our case, the real Americans, are being replaced. The leftists want to bring immigrants in. Hitler in Mein Kampf is always saying, the Jews, the Marxist Jews, want to destroy the Germans by bringing in immigrants, by undermining the people and race mixing. The Nazis harshly went after Magnus Hirschfeld, the gay Jewish scientist who was the founder of the Institute for Sexuelle Wissenschaft, the Institute for Sexual Science, which had the largest collection of of photos of gender fluidity that challenged gender norms. So the Nazis harshly targeted him as propaganda. So in their propaganda, so LGBT is always like a super focus of fascism because they believe in hierarchies, gender hierarchies, rigid gender roles, hierarchies of race, and hierarchies of nations. So we can think that this is foreign to us, but then we'd be ignoring the fact that in Mein Kampf, Hitler's main example of a state he wants Nazi Germany to emulate is the United States. So the Nuremberg laws, the laws that robbed my father of his citizenship and rendered him stateless at the age of 3 in Berlin, were based on the Jim Crow laws. So this book by James Witt, Hitler's American Model, is he went to the archives and he shows you the transcripts from the lawyers who are discussing the Nazi lawyers who are discussing the Nuremberg laws, and he shows you that they're looking at the Jim Crow anti-miscegenation laws as a model. One of the main Nazi lawyers compares the Nazi boycott of Jewish shops to the Jim Crow situation. He says that's just the American version of what we're doing. Black Americans have always known this. Langston Hughes in 1937, in Speeches in Paris, as the historian Matthew Delmont has just shown, but it's well known, essentially said fascism is Jim Crow with a foreign accent.
Wow.
So the black press in 1943, the Pittsburgh Courier, the black newspaper, founded a double V victory campaign, victory against fascism home and abroad. So the black soldiers fighting in a segregated army against Hitler always knew what they were doing. They were hoping that by fighting fascism abroad, they could get Americans to confront it at home. What were they fighting? They were fighting racial segregation. They were fighting racial hierarchies. So, they knowingly, explicitly knew that they were, they were hoping that this is what was happening. They were hoping that their heroism in World War II would bring Americans to confront Jim Crow at home. So the black Americans have always, black American intellectuals, black American press have always known about this connection. They blew the whistle on Hitler's persecution of the Jews very early on because they recognized it as what they.
So let me ask you a question about, you had started with the fact that after a big humiliation, and in Germany's case, it was the loss of World War One. But what is the humiliation in America that could be possibly provoking this kind of thing?
Well, we did just go through a series of wars, the Iraq War, we have a situation, Afghanistan. We have a situation where we have a lot of returning veterans. We have a lot of, that was of course the situation much magnified that Germany faced in the 1920s. So there are some parallels there, but in general, it doesn't need to. Nazi Germany isn't the only case. You can forge this sense of humiliation without losing a war, without World War One. You can do it, and the method that fascism uses is great replacement theory. What you say is that the dominant group is being replaced culturally, physically. So you say, look, the dominant. So fascism is based on ethno-nationalism. So for fascism to take root, you have to have a particular dominant ethno-nationalist identity. In Germany, it's the Nazis. In Italy, it was the Italians. Here in the United States, it's white Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Christian nationalism is the view that the founders were Christians who were channeling Christianity in our founding documents, and the greatness of our nation is due to its Christian character. Its exceptional nature is due to its Christian character. And since the founders were white men, Christian nationalism is white Christian nationalism. And so that's our ethno-nationalism here. And it simultaneously targets LGBT. Christian nationalism places men over women, straight people over LGBT, whites over non-whites, Christians over every other religion. And
men over women.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I started with that. Sorry.
Oh.
Men over women. Yeah, exactly. So we have a classic fascist formation which targets, and that's why we're all in this together, right?
Right.
That's with someone like Ron DeSantis, who's targeting LGBT and Black people. He just banned the teaching of African American history in Florida. He passed the bill modeled on Russia's 2013 Gay Propaganda Act, which forbids the representation of LGBT relationships to those under 18. So he passed a version of that for elementary school. So this goes, so this is the structure we face, and it never have surprised Black intellectuals that fascism has roots in.
So we want to get into Ron DeSantis later, because I mean, it's hearing you say that and seeing what's happening in these Republican states. I mean, it's so just similar in terms of what they're trying to do, and it seems like it's nothing but kind of promoting this fascist ideology. But I want to go to January 6th, because it was recently the 2-year anniversary of January 6th, and I wonder if you can just start by telling our audience, is what happened on January 6th a sign of fascism? And how do you kind of see where we are 2 years later in terms of how susceptible we still are to that?
So a number of historians of fascism were reluctant to label what we face here fascism until January 6th. So Paxton, for example, Robert Paxton. So a number of really heavy-hitting historians who were like, I'm not really sure, were like, January 6th really did it for them, because I think the problem with historians sometimes is they look for exact parallels, and January 6th has exact parallels to an attempted fascist coup in France in 1934. Obviously, there's things like the Hitler's beer hall putsch, which is somewhat less because it was then almost a decade later that the Nazis came to power. But in France, you had an attempted fascist coup that took exactly that form. So, and Paxton is a French historian of fascism. So there are major heavy-hitting historians who, like, after January 6th, are like, yes, the Republican Party is hiding a fascist social and political movement. However, I think we too much focus on the European case. And we don't look at Latin America, for instance. Latin America has had a whole bunch of dictatorships since World War II, right-wing dictatorships. And I think that's very much the structure of what we're looking at. January 6th threatens to be a kind of rallying cry moment for the fascist social and political movement that we face here in the United States. A kind of look at the heroism, that's the structure. Look at our heroes who tried to save our nation. That's the worry that scholars have, that it becomes a kind of rallying cry moment, like the beer hall putsch.
And when we talk about a rallying cry, Trump's words, and I would go back to way before the election about if I lose, this is a fraudulent election, to his words, go to the Capitol. We can't have a democracy unless you do this. How connected are his words and lies to the violence that we saw on that day?
Directly connected. He was engaging in incitement to violence. I mean, incitement to riot. I mean, he's an authority figure, and when figures who are in authority tell people, you need to fight for your nation. If the president of the United States says you need to fight for your nation, a lot of Americans are going to believe him. So, because that's what authority means, right? So it was a national crisis. It's not just, I mean, it's beyond irresponsible. It is what upsets me about January 6th is that we're not targeting the people who are really responsible, which are the political leaders, the Ted Cruz's, the Trumps. They're the ones really responsible, because it's completely understandable if you're a normal American, if the president of the United States and multiple senators like Ted Cruz, who went to Princeton, let's not forget, these are people who should know better. I'm a man of the people. I went to State University of New York at Stony Brook. Ted Cruz went to Princeton. He went to Harvard Law School. This is the man telling you, these are people telling you the election has been stolen. So these are the people that should have known better. And it's completely understandable that a number of people would be misled and not know what to believe when authority figures like that lie to them. And that's and they should be held responsible. And instead, we're holding lower level people responsible who were incited by them. Of course, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, these are far right fascist groups that should be held responsible. They're if they do something illegal, and they should be held responsible. But there were, the situation you create when the president of the United States spreads such massive lies, that's the fault of the president, of the person, of someone. That's someone abusing their authority by definition.
So in the same vein as accountability, and I completely agree with you that the pace at which accountability is happening here is really just painfully slow. But one of the striking things, we mentioned Brazil at the outset of the conversation, and compared to Brazil, it seems like the pace at which accountability is happening here is rolling just far slower. I'm wondering, is there due process in Brazil, and is that what slowed down the arrest of invaders here? And do you think that delay is necessary in our system, and does it increase the chances for the far right to repeat their actions of January 6th?
So, of course, there's been very little accountability for the people who should be held accountable, which are the political, or no accountability. So, we have a specific structure here that Tim Snyder said this on I forget which show, but he said, in a rule of law country, Trump and the other political leaders like Cruz, Hawley, etc., they'd be in prison for this. In a dictatorship, they'd be dead. So we're somewhere in between. So what's happening in Brazil is different, more complex. It's not a better situation. It's just a different situation. It's a different situation with some of the same causes. Obviously, it was a copycat thing. It was a copycat event. they missed it by 2 days. It was silly because Congress wasn't in session. Congress wasn't in session, and no one was there. But it was intended. It was intended copycat event. I don't say better because we know it looks like the military escorted the protesters into the Brazilian capital. Lula did not order the military to do the arrests because he did not trust the military. So he used the federal police. He trusted neither the local Brazilian the local police in Brasilia nor the military. He trusted the federal police. So there's a lot of penetration of Bolsonaro supporters in the military in Brazil. And we're talking about a country that very recently was a fascist military dictatorship till 1986, that communists and leftists.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that because when we look at what happened in Brazil and the military involvement, and except in our case, there were military people in the rioting crowd, but there's no evidence that the military assisted them to get in or in any other way. But when you look at history and uprisings against governments, how common is it that the military gets involved? And is there any evidence that the military was involved in January 6th other than as protesters?
No, I don't think the military has been. We've been lucky in that regard. Fascism wins when you have complicity when you have active participation from the police, the military, when you have those institutions supporting the authoritarian takeover, and that's what we really have to worry about in the case of Brazil. I think in the United States now, the presence of military veterans here, we talked about earlier. You asked what kind of loss has the United States had? Well, literature on fact talks about the role of returning veterans in fascist takeovers who are disgruntled, upset that they didn't receive a lost war or a complicated, unjust wars like Iraq. The Americans generally recognize that was an utter disaster and failure. Those leave veterans very upset and disgruntled because they're not getting the kind of appreciation that they should, because it wasn't their fault that our leaders sent them into a completely unjust war. So what happened in the past is disgruntled veterans often form the basis of far-right authoritarian movements, and that's what we see here. And it's very similar to unfortunately, but these are people who are trained in the military, and they are an effective battalion, essentially, for a far-right takeover.
Wow. So let's look at closer what's happening here in America right now. In Congress, I mean, we're seeing people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and other representatives who lie and denied the 2020 election results, serving on really key committees like the Oversight Committee and other Homeland Security committees. How dangerous is it that we are giving these people more power in Congress?
That's a rhetorical question. Obviously, you just want me to explain how dangerous it is.
Yes.
Well, obviously, we have a, I think that the danger in the short term, well, there's so many dangers you can't even, it's hard to enumerate them. Hard to remember from the Trump administration, so many things are happening so quickly on so many different fronts that it's like a waterfall. And that's part of the purpose of that. So on the one hand, we have the kind of destruction of the United States' international credit with the refusal to raise the debt limit, which would if you cause widespread economic devastation, people will turn to other outlets, right? Now, note that the Republican Congress under Trump just passed the debt limit every time while Trump was racking up enormous debt. It was no issue at all, because they know that if they destroy the country under Trump, it'll hurt people's views of Trump. So they're actively trying to destroy the country and then getting people to blame it on Biden. But the problem is, if you default on the debt, we're the only country in the world that can borrow like this. No other country can do that. To jeopardize that is to jeopardize our special status. It's literally an attack on America. And so that's a huge danger. So I mean, what do they want? They want the euro to be the reserve currency. So that is, those things are possibilities if we let them carry this out. So, but they don't care. They don't care about the country. They just care. They want to tear down everything, and power is the only thing that matters. So that's what we face. We face people who are we face a group on the radical right who are completely unconstrained by the rule of law. So what do you do when people are completely unconstrained by the rule of law? So they'd be willing to tolerate anything as long as it gets them into power. So I don't even think we're talking about people with a specific political ideology. They're going to be far right to draw the evangelicals in. By the way, Brazil, what happened in Brazil was and Thea Butler said in the Scholar of Christian Nationalism said on Twitter that Brazil was no doubt plotted in churches. It was the press coverage of what happened in Brazil was filled with reports of people praying before they went in to sack the Congress. The alarming numbers of preachers that were present. So these Pentecostal evangelical extremism, Christian nationalism, is driving a lot of this.
I want to follow up on what you just said about the fact that the Republicans don't care and they want to destroy the country and are using the debt ceiling as one of the tactics to get that. But they've also been taking away, or are in favor of taking away, a lot of basic rights, the right to vote, for example. And they have now formed committees that are really, it seems to me, designed to make people distrust the government and to give themselves a platform to perpetuate the lies that they have been living on and to create a clown show. And I don't know if this is part of what propaganda and fascism require, but it scares me. And it scares me that there are millions of Americans who will believe what they're hearing. Am I right to be worried? And what is the methodology for making people listen to the truth? How do you communicate? How do you overcome lies when they come from the president, now the former president? But he started it when he was president. He started it when he was a candidate. So there are now years of lies by Donald Trump and all of his enablers. And when I've tried to engage with a Trump supporter, they simply reject anything. Well, I just simply don't believe that fact. When you say, well, what about the judges that threw out all the cases of fraud? Oh, I don't believe that. I believe that there were machines that, manipulated the vote. How do we get back to facts in America? How do we overcome this propaganda?
Okay, so I think a lot of it is, your work, it's a different time than Watergate. Okay. So it's not that time. I think it's a time where a lot of people you're talking to don't care whether it's a lie or not. They're, Ali Alexander, the person, the Stop the Steal movement leader. Here's what we mean by the election was stolen. If you win, it was stolen. If we win, it was fair. That's what he said. So, and within churches, within evangelical churches, nobody cares whether the election was actually stolen. Nobody cares. Everyone knows that it's about that white Christians are about everyone believes, because it's not true, sorry, everyone believes that white Christians are going to be replaced, are going to have their power removed, and they think that they need to rule as a minority. And democracy itself is the enemy. So that means they know. I think the vast majority of people who say the election was stolen know the election was not stolen, but they view democracy as their enemy because they think that eventually their far right extremist Christian ideology is going to be supported by a minority of Americans. It already is supported by a minority of Americans. So you appoint a far right, illegitimate Supreme Court, anti-democratic, quasi-fascist Supreme Court that is far to the right of the majority of Americans, and you try to gain power that way by employing aspects of the American system, such as the Senate, the Electoral College, that are anti-democratic by their nature. So I think that it's not as much a problem about trying to convince people of things because they already know. In fact, in churches, they're being told that democracy, the enemy, is really democracy. That they need to seize control of the nation before it is taken from them, and they know perfectly well that it will be that it will be taken at the ballot box.
So I want to ask a follow-up question to that in the same vein of misinformation and disinformation and lies and what gets people to believe in these things. Is there any way to reach that audience, those people who think that there are magnets in COVID vaccine or believe that the 2020 election was stolen? Is there any way to reach them anymore? And if so, how do we do that?
Again, how many of them actually believe that and how many of them are just, that Ron DeSantis doesn't believe it. He graduated and went to Harvard. I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, the movement, it's not disinformation. They know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could define for us propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, lies. Are they all the same thing, or is there a difference between them? Because now we're getting into this, whether people actually believe what they're saying or the listeners believe it.
I think we focus too much on the information aspect. It's more like it's more tribal than that. If you're in a group, there are certain things you say, like the election. If you are a Trump supporter, you say the election is stolen, whether you believe it or not, because as Ali Alexander said, here's what it means. If you win, it's stolen. If we win, it's not. It's fair. What's mysterious about that? It's more a power struggle. But the way the information space works, it's no longer a democratic information space. A democratic information space is one where we trust each other enough so that we can communicate normally. But what you do try to destroy a democratic information space is you try to radically undermine trust. You try to say the other side are pedophiles. The other side are kidnapping little children in their sex groups. So whatever they say, even if it's true, you need to discount it because it's in the service of this evil cause. Then the information space is completely different, right? The information space is completely filled with mistrust. And so there's no straightforward communication going on. It's just a war for power. I mean, nobody on the battlefield in World War II was like, hey, you're not being fair. So that's what you try to do. That's what fascist politics involves. Fascist politics involves, painting the other side as monsters, as sexual offenders and things like this. So
you mentioned the difference between now and Watergate. In Watergate, we had 3 basic communications tools, which were ABC, NBC, and CBS. And they all had the same facts. No one debated the facts. People debated policy outcomes. But now you're quite right. Facts are at issue and facts are ignored because I think you're right. People just don't care if it's true or not.
in an existential struggle for your life. You know, it's not a discussion, right? And so, you know, the other person says something, you know, like they want to kill you. So what you have is you have, unfortunately, this is a situation we face. One group wants to kill democracy, and so you know, it's hard for me to trust Ted Cruz. I mean, I don't trust what he says, even if it's true, like, because I know that he has an anti-democratic agenda, and it's about power. So the question is, what will return us to a situation where I can sit across the table from, you know,
Okay.
a far right evangelical uh,
Right.
MAGA supporter, and we can say we're both Americans. We love this country. You know, we have different beliefs, but that's part of being in a democracy. You know, I have to trust that you're not going to impose your beliefs on my Jewish children. You know, you're going to have to trust me that even though I'm pro LGBT, I'm not going to demand that anyone becomes gay if they don't want to. You know, and so we're going to trust each other. But politicians are tearing us apart. That's what they're doing. They're engaging in a politics just for power, and they're trying to represent. They're trying to fracture the fact that we're all Americans. They're trying to say the real Americans are the white Christians.
Can I pin you down on that? How do you reach that audience? Is there any way that you can get through to them? Or is it just, I am so committed to destroying democracy because I am a white Christian, not me, but them saying this, I'm a white Christian and I need to be in control. Are we headed to the kind of apartheid that has now been abolished in South Africa? What is there any way to overcome this?
It's going to be tough because
Yeah.
they're hearing from, and you know, there's no easy way, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be a fight because every Sunday, a large portion of Americans hear that their country is under assault from people like me.
Wow.
So every country, large portion of Americans is being told that God requires them to save this country from people who aren't white and Christian and straight.
So
So
one of the things that I'm comforted by, but also not really, because it's a long-term solution to, I think, a very immediate problem, is things like news literacy classes. You know, how can we equip the future generations with the tools needed to distinguish between lies and fiction, between lies and truth? Do you think that's an effective way to start combating this? Or based off of your research, what are the most effective ways to combat lies and propaganda and all of this?
I know you guys want to talk about that, but I've come to believe that's not the problem we face. The problem we face is we are fractured. The problem is that there are Americans who want this to be a Christian nation. There are Americans who want this to be their nation. And they rightly see
Wow.
that there are different Americans with different values. And how do you combat that? Well, I think the only way to combat that is to you know, share the wealth of Americans, make people feel less economically anxious. That's one way to do it. Maybe that's not a silver bullet, but to see people with values are their enemies, and that's a hard process. It involves, unfortunately, us remaking the country so that, you know, it's not one group of people with one values living in cities and another group with another set of values living in rural areas, for example. Um, but we've become fractured so that, you know, I don't have, you know, somebody with a hat living next door. If I did, they would see I'm a nice guy. You know, I'm a good neighbor. But that's not what we face, and we face a structure of a more existential challenge. As I said, you know, and it's when it's connected to religion, religious wars. The history is the history of religious wars, right? So
Wow.
I think it's a lot easier if we face reality, and you guys know that what I'm saying is true.
Well, you're definitely scaring me, and you've definitely got my attention. But let me ask you: do you think lawsuits? I was very optimistic that the lawsuit against Fox by the voting machine company that it defamed might get Fox to stop fostering the propagation of lies. I was very pleased when Trump withdrew his frivolous lawsuit against the New York Attorney General because he had gotten over $1 million or nearly $1 million in fines for a frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. So, is there any way that lawsuits might control this behavior, not change the attitude, not change this desire, but could it control it? Is that possible?
Yeah, so that's why when you want to turn against democracy, you want to see courts, right? The use of the legal system is a tool. It can be a tool to make us a rule of law country, or it can be a tool to be used against the rule of law, like Viktor Orban does in Hungary,
Yeah.
where he directs lawsuits with regularity against. He uses the state to direct like frivolous, like suddenly media corp companies face enormous tax fines and they have to sell themselves to his friends. And Ron DeSantis is imitating that, right, with his targeting of the Disney Corporation. He's explicitly, knowingly taking a page from Viktor Orban's book. So you're going to see the courts. I mean, the courts are, of course, the center of all this. The education system is at the center of all this. The courts are at the center of all this. If the courts keep us as a rule of law nation, then lawsuits would be a way to go. And the hope is always that the courts will save us. But the courts can turn authoritarian. We see that with the Supreme Court, right? So, that Moore versus Harper was even on the docket is shocking. So that's that would have essentially ended democracy by turning the vote over to state legislatures that are majority Republican.
Just for our audience, that is the case that is a follow-on to the Eastman theory of the independent state legislature, where they can do anything and can't be reviewed by any court. And so they can abolish all your rights, and that's the end of it. And that is, to me, the most significant case at the Supreme Court. And you're right, because Hitler also used the courts. He didn't do everything all at once. He at first passed rules that said Jews can't shop. Then Jews can't work in a shop. Then Jews can't own a shop.
Jews can't wear lederhosen.
Okay, right. And Jews have to wear a star. So, but he did this through changing laws one at a time, gradually getting it to not only Jews can't shop, Jews can't leave the ghetto. They have to move to the ghetto and they have to stay there. So it is frightening that courts allowed that to happen. And our courts have done similarly horrible things. I mean, if we look at what happened to the Japanese during the war, the courts allowed that. And so you're right, but we have to rely on something to keep us a democracy, to protect all people. I mean, I'm a longtime ACLU member, former board member, who believes that even though I hate what you're saying, you have a right to say it. And that in the marketplace of ideas, truth will out. But we're getting so far away from that I am worried.
I don't think there's any good argument that in the marketplace of ideas, truth will out. And even John Stuart Mill at the end of chapter 2 of On Liberty says, well, this argument for free speech only works if there's a morality of public discussion. If people don't gang up on each other and mob each other, and people in higher situations don't ridicule people in lower situations. But if I got off Twitter, but I can tell you there's no morality of public discussion on Twitter, if that's our public sphere. So there's no argument that the truth will out without hefty premises that are false, that just don't hold of the currency.
So where can I follow you now? Because I did try to look you up on Twitter, and I saw you're not there anymore. So how can people follow your views? Is there some other platform you're using?
I publish articles occasionally and op-eds. So, and my book, How Fascism Works, is my 2018 book. Will spells out some of what I'm saying. But I don't anymore. I'm in the media I had a Guardian piece I published on Friday, but it was about anti-Semitism. It wasn't, but I will publish, but I'm not going to participate in that instant fight culture of social media. I thought it was toxic for my family, and took my energy away from what's most important to me, which is my children and my wife. So I'm going to continue to. People can look out for my op-eds in newspapers. I write for the Guardian with regularity, and Project Syndicate, which syndicates my work across the world in different languages, and a number of other outlets.
If you keep us informed of what you've written, if you send emails to us, we'll make sure that they get on our website to let our audience at least see your viewpoints. And I think you're making me up my contribution to the ADL. Because you're scaring me.
Yeah. Well, the ADL, I'm not sure I think in these, what you need to contribute to right now are voter registration, registration in the South, in Georgia. We've seen Georgia getting it done. Those black led groups who really know how to deal with voter suppression. There's groups like the African American Policy Forum led by Kimberly Crenshaw. I think it's Black voters have often saved America in the past. They're our national minority. The historic group, like Jews were in Europe, the historic group that is connected to our history, that is always the scapegoat. And as a result, they have the kind of know-how that delivers the results that we've seen again and again in Georgia. So when you see those results coming in, when you see people getting it done, like different voter registration, I'll send you some of the names of these groups.
Great. We'd love to put that on our website as well, in the show notes. That would be fabulous. I think that's very important. Yeah. Very important.
Yeah. So we have one last question for you, which is, if you could tell Americans one thing about the state of America right now, what would it be? And what is the best response? I mean, you mentioned registering people in Georgia, but what are some other things that people can do right now against this backdrop of far-right extremism?
Join a union, but not the police union. Are the bulwark of except the police union. The unions have been the bulwark of democracy, just empirically. I was shocked. That's why Hitler goes against unions here. If you look at the South, racial equality, our rights it's the big labor unions that have fought for them again and again and again. That's why the first thing the far right does when they take over a state legislature is pass right to work laws. It immediately makes support your teachers union, support public education. The public education is being attacked. Look at the things that are the bulwarks of our democracy: labor unions, public education, public goods. Support them in the face of this attack, because as you said, they're trying to get people to distrust public goods. They're trying to get people to trust the structure that binds us together as one nation.
I would add libraries to that list of needing protection.
Thank you. Also, they've moved from public schools. They've now really targeted libraries, and there are websites that direct parents to instructions for how to get books banned at your library. So
no more banned books.
Yes.
No, exactly.
It only makes kids want to read them more anyway. I have a T-shirt that says, "I read banned books," and I will always read banned books.
Right. That's what's called the making lemonade out of lemons strategy, is saying.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll have to fight it. It's true that if your book is banned, it will increase its sales, but we still.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I'll have to work on that.
Well, look at the number one, the only book in U.S. history that's been banned by name in a law is the 1619 Project, which resulted in being the biggest bestseller in decades or something.
Yeah.
Wasn't Lady Chatterley's Lover banned?
By name?
by name? I think so.
Interesting. Could be
I don't
the
know. Maybe not. I'll have to research that.
insanity, but
Well, this has been so fascinating. I really, I've learned a great deal, and I appreciate this, and I hope we can continue this dialogue as we see how America develops, what happens as we start the campaign for 2024. And uh, I, for one, will continue to try to fight to get the facts out there. I still believe truth matters, that facts matter, and that we have to keep saying what is true and what isn't true. I try not to retweet anything that has a lie in it, even with, although occasionally with commentary of blatant lie, just to make sure that there are answers with countering it with the facts. I still think facts matter.
they do. But don't facts do matter, but we have to get to a situation where we trust each other enough to have a fact-based discourse.
Yeah.
So we've got to have trust first, because
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to reread Areopagitica and see if I can convince you that it does come down to in the free marketplace, truth will out. Because I don't know what the other answer is if we don't keep on trying to get the facts out there.
no, we've got to get the facts out there. But there's no facts don't matter on a battlefield. In fact,
Yeah.
it's not an argument. It's just a war, and that's
Yeah.
unfortunately we've got ourselves in. We first got to trust each other, not to be each other's enemies so much, and then we can have a fact-based discourse.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure, and truly we've learned so much, and hopefully we can continue this dialogue because it's so important.
Thank you so much.
Oh, just hold on a second. Victor, you'll have to hand.
Okay. The dog, so it's just me right now. That was a really fascinating conversation. I think for a lot of people, democracy is such an abstract concept, and so to hear Jason talk about the threat of fascism and what it means right now to have a society that completely distrusts each other as a result of politicians who feed them lies, who know better but still yet feed them lies, is really alarming. And so, like you said, I think one of the best ways to respond is joining things that actually counter that. So unions are great, supporting your libraries, those are the things that will actually resist that. So I thought it was a really cool conversation, a really alarming conversation. I'm scared now, and I'm doubling down on my commitment to fight back against this, and I know Jill is as well, and hopefully she has a handle on her dog.
I do. Things are under control again. Sorry. I'm back. Do you want to
Wonderful.
continue our conversation from before the beginning of the show about the Pence documents, or should we wait until we know more facts about the Pence documents?
Maybe I don't know where you were at the beginning of the show, but maybe just quickly talking about the differences between Pence and Biden, which seems more similar compared to Trump. And then I know we're at 53 minutes now, so we can wrap with that perhaps.
Okay, so I think the big difference is that what matters is what happens once the documents are discovered. There is a problem with the documents being in a non-secure location. Bad. And that is a systemic problem that must be dealt with. Somehow the government needs to be more like a library and check things out and check them back in. In the case of Biden and Pence, it appears that the National Archives did not even know that they were missing documents. And so there was no way to even request them back. In the case of Trump, they knew they were missing documents. They asked for them back, and he refused. He said, "No, I'm keeping them. They're mine. I want them." And then he lied about them. He said, "Okay, I'm giving these back. You now have everything." He had a lawyer sign a fake affidavit, a totally false affidavit saying complete search was made and there is no more. And that was a lie. That led to not just the subpoena that was being lied about, but to a search warrant, a search which revealed many more cartons of documents. I'm not talking about a half dozen, a dozen, 2 dozen. I'm talking about a whole, bad stuff. The big difference is that we don't prosecute people for just accidentally removing a document. It's bad. It shouldn't happen. And we need a system that stops it. But what we do prosecute for, what is criminal, is when there's an intent which there doesn't seem to be for Pence or Biden, but does seem to be for Trump, and when they do something else. And in the case of Trump, obstruction is clear. The lies and the resistance, the hiding of them, those are clear additional elements that make it prosecutable. So I think that's what the big deal is.
Absolutely. Well, we will definitely be keeping an eye on that in the weeks to come. And stay tuned. Next week, we'll be back with another episode of iGen Politics. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you follow your podcast. We will be back next week. And we hope you enjoy this video. And we'll be sure to post Jason's articles in our show notes because I think it's essential reading. And his book on fascism and propaganda is unfortunately one that we need to read more than ever before. So thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next week with another episode of iGen Politics.